my screen.
Yes, it is visible,
Ma'am,
sir.
can you please confirm if okay, thank you so much. Can you also confirm which slide I am on right now?
Sir, it is in PPT mode and first, now you have changed the slide. It is qualitative data and all.
And even now it's on the same slide, ma'am?
Yes, qualitative data and then is where step-by-step procedure and one table.
Okay, okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. So a very good morning to all the participants, all the respected participants and the host. So this session is going to be about two important areas of research. We research as researchers. So we're going to talk reliability and validity, which are pillars of research. But
Sir,
before we delve into the details of Hanji,
sir, voice is intermittently breaking.
ma'am.
Voice is breaking, sir.
No, is it with everyone else also? Because I can perfectly hear you.
Voice is
Sir,
breaking.
it is breaking.
Yes, sir, it is breaking.
Just give me
सर
a
मे बी
minute.
वीडियो अगर ऑफ रखेंगे तो मे बी वॉइस क्लियर हो जाएगा सर.
Okay, okay, let me try doing that. अभी ठीक है मैम?
Yes, yes, now it's
थोड़ा
fine.
better? Okay, okay ma'am, okay. So before we go into the concepts of reliability and validity, let us first discuss Maxwell's interactive model of research design. Now, this is a framework that revolutionizes how we approach the research process. अगर हम traditional view की बात करें, research design is often seen as a linear path with fixed steps from start to finish. However, this model, Maxwell's model, it challenges this notion by recognizing that research is a dynamic, it is a complex, and it is an iterative process. And at the heart of this Maxwell's model, there are three critical components: research questions, research methods, and interpretations. So what does this model do differently? Rather than treating these elements as separate entities, Maxwell emphasizes their interconnectedness and the need for continual dialogue and reflection throughout the research journey. Now imagine research as a vibrant conversation, okay? So wherein we start with our research questions, which guide our explorations and shape the methods we choose to employ. But thoda sa twist ke saath. What is the twist? That as we delve deeper into our study, there are new insights that emerge, there is new data that unfolds, and our perspectives shift. So Maxwell's model acknowledges this fluidity and it encourages us to adapt our research design accordingly. And it reminds us that research is not just a one-way street, but it is a dynamic process of discovery and growth. And we, as academicians and researchers, we must be open to revisiting our questions, refining our methods, and reevaluating our interpretations as we uncover new layers of understanding. Okay, so this model invites us to engage in a continuous cycle of inquiry, reflection, of refinement, which would ultimately lead to deeper insights and more robust findings. Okay. Moving on, if we talk about qualitative data, so what is qualitative data? It can be, okay, first of all, let us also establish that everything is data. The conversation, it is not just data, is not just numbers anymore, right? Sirf agar hum India ke GDP ki baat karenge, that is not only data, that is not what only data includes. Okay, the conversation that we are having is also data. Hum Instagram pe, hum WhatsApp par kya search kar rahe hain, wo bhi data hai. So everything, every transaction, every communication, every correspondence is data. Okay, so quantitative data तो easily definable होता है, easily accessible भी हो जाता है, because there are a lot of agencies, institutions which are which work on compiling data, जैसे IMF है, World Bank है. अगर इंडियन स्पेसिफिक डेटाबेस की बात करेंगे, अगर क्वांटिटेटिव डेटा की, तो बहुत सारा जो भी मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक वेरिएबल्स का डेटा होता है वो वहां पर होता है आरबीआई के डेटाबेस पे. फॉर एग्जांपल मॉस्पी जो है, मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ स्टैटिस्टिकल एंड प्रोग्रामिंग एंड इम्प्लीमेंटेशन, उसके अलावा आरबीआई का डेटाबेस ऑन इंडियन इकोनॉमी. ओके, बट रिलायबिलिटी और वैलिडिटी की प्रॉब्लम जो आती है वो आती है क्वालिटेटिव डेटा के कॉन्सेप्ट में. ओके, व्हाट इज क्वालिटेटिव डेटा? इट इज अ डिस्क्रिप्टिव इंफॉर्मेशन दैट कैप्चर्स observable qualities and characteristics which are not quantifiable by numbers. It is collected from interviews, focus group observations हो गया, documents which are offering insights into experiences, perception and behavior. जो भी abstract concept होते हैं, जैसे integrity हो गया, honesty हो गया, हम उसको measure नहीं कर सकते. Okay, so qualitative data analysis cannot be counted or measured because it describes the data and it refers to the words or labels used to describe certain characteristics or traits. And this type of data answers the why or how behind the analysis. Okay, we often use it to conduct open-ended studies. Okay, so allowing those partaking to show their true feelings and actions without directions. Okay, so think of qualitative data as the type of data that you would get if you were to ask someone why they did something, what was their reasoning. Okay, and accordingly, what is qualitative research then? Qualitative research not only helps to collect this kind of data, but it also gives the researchers a chance to understand the trends and meanings of natural actions. Okay, it gives us the theoretical background as to why something is happening. And this type of data research focuses on qualities of the users, the actions behind the numbers. Qualitative research is the descriptive and subjective research that helps bring context to quantitative data. And also, sorry, it is flexible and it is iterative. For example, a statement, the little girl had red hair with a white hat. Okay, another example, the music had a light tone that filled the hall. Okay, so these are describing the quality of the tone that was there. Okay, the quality of the music that was there. So qualitative data is important in determining the frequency of traits or characteristics, and understanding your data can help you understand your customers, your users, your visitors better. And when you understand your audience better, you can make them happier, more satisfied. Okay, and this is with respect to marketing analytics. So qualitative data helps the marketing researchers answer questions like what issues or problems they are facing, what motivates them, what improvements can be made. Okay, moving on. Yeah, moving on. So you're most likely used qualitative data today, and this type of data is found in your everyday work in statistics all over the web. For example, qualitative data is in the descriptions, like we were talking about. The bright white light pierces the small dark space. And even in research, we are there. These kind of methods allow analysts to use contextual information to create theories and models. Open or जो close-ended questions होते हैं, those can be helpful in understanding what is the reason, क्या motivation है, क्या hindrances है, क्या frustrations हैं, क्या actions हैं in any type of case. For example, of qualitative data be what is your most recent job title, how do you rank in the search engines, how do you rate your purchase experience. Usually when we eat at a restaurant or at a hotel, जब वो bill लेकर आते हैं, then they also give us a feedback on how would you rate your experience at our restaurant, good, bad, or exceptional. So all these kind of data are qualitative data, and we experience them in our day-to-day life. Okay. Now, what distinguishes qualitative data from quantitative data? So qualitative data is individualized. It is descriptive and it is relating to emotions. Quantitative data, on the other hand, is countable, it is measurable, and it is relating to numbers. Qualitative data helps us understand why or how something occurred behind certain behaviors, whereas quantitative data helps us understand how many, how much, or how often something has occurred. Okay, now if we talk about types of data, so all data on the basis of their measurement can be divided into 4 categories. Okay, and these are also known as 4 levels of measurement: nominal data, ordinal data, cardinal भी बोलते हैं, interval data को, and then at the last is ratio data. At the highest level of measurement is ratio data. So knowing the differences between these type is essential, especially important for when you are using statistical software to analyze data. अब जैसे जेंडर है, जेंडर आप रैंक नहीं कर सकते हो, आप कैटेगराइज कर सकते हो, आप उसको रैंक नहीं कर सकते हो, आप उनके बीच का डिफरेंस नहीं मेजर कर सकते हो. ओके, so that is the nominal data wherein there are different categories, but you cannot refer to numbers or quantities. For example, gender, men and women, type of pet, cat, dog, fish. आप ये नहीं बोल सकते one is better than the other. Okay, so nominal data does not refer to numbers or quantities. For example, you cannot divide a dog by 2. Okay, then comes the ordinal data, which refers to data which can be put into an order or ranked. For example, your education level. Usually questionnaires पे data होता है, right? What is your education level? UG, PG, yeah, undergraduate, postgraduate, high school, middle school, okay, professional course. So we know that a postgraduate is highly qualified than an undergraduate. Okay, similarly, an undergraduate is highly qualified as compared to a high schooler, right? But ordinal data mein we cannot say that the difference between the categories is going to be uniform. For example, difference between UG, PG, postgraduate and an undergraduate cannot be equal to difference between an undergraduate and a high schooler or a secondary school, right? So we cannot be sure about the difference. It cannot be uniform, or we cannot at least measure. So that is an example of ordinal data. Okay, then comes the cardinal, also known as interval data, which can be categorized, which can be ranked. Okay, and also the difference is uniform, but it does not have a true zero or an absolute zero. It has an arbitrary zero. For example, temperature, which is measured in degrees Celsius or degree Fahrenheit. Okay, so we also have 0 degree Celsius temperature, but that does not imply that there is no atmosphere at all at 0 degree, right? So it's an arbitrary zero. And at the highest level, we have ratio data, which again has category, can be categorized, which can be ranked, and which also has consistent units and also has a true zero. Okay, for example, age, for example, height, for example, weight, anything that can be. Okay, अब height minus में नहीं हो सकती, weight minus negative में नहीं हो सकता, temperature हो सकता है. So that is why, because temperature or the cardinal data has an arbitrary zero, artificial zero. Okay, now, since we have established a bit of basics about the data and different types of data and measurement scale, now we will talk about reliability and validity, and we will start from the basics, the basic layman's definition of reliability and validity, and then we'll move into the technicalities of reliability and validity. Now, in everyday life, we probably use reliability. Madam, एक बात बताइए, is the medium fine or should I be bilingual?
Bilingual.
Bilingual. That's what I wanted to know. थोड़ा कई बार हो जाता है, एक medium में थोड़ा monotonous भी हो जाता है. So is it fine with everyone if I switch to bilingual mode?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
A bit of Hindi and a bit of
Yes,
English?
sir. No
Hindi
problem.
and
No
English.
problem. No
Hindi
problem.
and English is preferred.
Okay, okay. Hindi and English.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so हम बात करते हैं थोड़ा सा reliability और validity के बारे में. अगर हम, if you talk about everyday life, so we probably use reliability to describe how something is valid. पर research और testing में ऐसा नहीं है. Reliability और validity को हम in general layman's term बहुत बार as synonyms use कर लेते हैं, as substitute use कर लेते हैं. But reliability, validity are not the same thing when we talk about research and testing. Now, evidence-based practice includes, in part, implementation of the findings of well-conducted quality research studies. So, being able to critique quantitative research is an important skill for researchers. And consideration must be given not only to the results of the study, but also to the fact कितना rigor लगाया गया है research में. और जो ये rigor है, this refers to the extent to which the researchers worked to enhance the quality of the studies. So quantitative research में this is achieved through measurement of the two concepts, the validity and reliability. और जब हम data analysis की बात करते हैं, so reliability refers to how easily replicable an outcome is. कि अगर हम एक ही चीज को दोबारा करेंगे, given everything is constant or the same, तो कितना इजीली हम अपने पिछले रिजल्ट को रेप्लिकेट कर पाएंगे. अगर बहुत ही सरल भाषा में हम एग्जांपल कंसीडर करें, मान लीजिए यू आर मेजरिंग अ कप ऑफ राइस 3 टाइम्स, ठीक है, एंड यू गेट द सेम रिजल्ट ईच टाइम. That implies what? That the result is reliable. Okay. Validity, on the other hand, refers to the measurements accuracy. This means that अगर हम same example की बात करें, अगर standard weight एक cup of rice का 5 ग्राम है and you measure a cup of rice, it should be 5 gram. Okay. Reliability में we were not concerned whether it should be 5 gram or not. It should be same every time we perform the experiment. पर validity में अगर हम कप से मेजर कर रहे हैं और वो 5 ग्राम होना चाहिए, तो राइस का अमाउंट भी 5 ग्राम ही आना चाहिए. Okay, so while reliability and validity are intertwined, they are not synonymous. And if one of the measurement parameters, such as your scale, is distorted, the result will be consistent but invalid. Okay, मान लीजिए जो वेइंग मशीन होती है ना, और बहुत जगह होता है जहां पर सब्जी वाले तराजू के नीचे दे पुट मैग्नेट. हाँ, तो आप उसको बार बार भी कितना भी तोलोगे, बार बार कितना भी वेट करोगे, उसके ऊपर वे करोगे, तो वो हमेशा वो ही दिखाएगा जितना पिछली बार दिखाया था. कुछ वेइंग मशीन फॉर एग्जाम्पल 50 ग्राम 500 ग्राम कम दिखाती हैं वेट या ज्यादा दिखा देती हैं वेट, तो हर बार आप करोगे तो वो रिलायबल तो है ना, क्योंकि हर बार वो 5 किलो की जगह 5 किलो 500 ग्राम दिखा रहा है, राइट. बट वो वैलिड नहीं है बिकॉज आइडियली इट शुड हैव वेट 5 kgs. Okay, and so data must be consistent and accurate to be used to draw useful conclusions. एक और छोटा सा हम एग्जांपल लेते हैं which is usually considered commonly to clarify these two concepts. Okay, so validity is defined as the extent to which a concept is accurately measured in a quantitative study. For example, there's a survey which is designed to explore depression, पर वो measure कर रहा है anxiety. Now, this would not be considered valid. Okay. The second measure of quality in a quantitative study is reliability or the accuracy of an instrument. So, the extent to which a research instrument consistently has the same results if it is used in the same situations on repeated occasions. एक बहुत simple से example, we Indians have usually we have this tendency to set our alarm clocks prior to the actual timing. So मान लीजिए there's an alarm clock which rings at 7 every morning. Okay, but it is actually set for 6:30. Now it is very reliable क्योंकि consistently हर रोज सेम टाइम पर वो रिंग कर रहा है अलार्म क्लॉक, बट वो वैलिड नहीं है. क्यों? बिकॉज इट इज नॉट रिंगिंग एट द डिजायर्ड टाइम. वो 7 बजे बज रहा है जबकि उसे वो 6:30 बजे बज रहा है जबकि उसे 7 बजे बजना था, राइट. सो इट्स इंपॉर्टेंट टू कंसिडर वैलिडिटी एंड रिलायबिलिटी. अगर हम बहुत ही क्रिस्प में बात करें, सो रिलायबिलिटी इज टू डू विद रेप्लिकेबिलिटी. ओके, कंसिस्टेंसी कितनी है. वैलिडिटी इज टू डू विद द मेजरमेंट. Okay, so it's important to consider validity and reliability of the data collection tools when either conducting or critiquing the research. Okay, now let's see a short video to understand why it is important, no, or let's say why it is important to understand reliability or validity, or let's say why it is important for us as researchers and academicians to understand these two concepts, or to ensure that our research is both reliable and valid. Okay, now वीडियो में आपको ऑडियो नहीं सुनाई देगा, विजुअल दिखेगा. ऑडियो की जरूरत नहीं है, सिर्फ विजुअल पर फोकस करिए. देन आई विल आस्क यू हाउ दिस कैन बी रिलेटेड टू रिसर्च. ओके, प्लीज पे अटेंशन. Okay, so tell me how this can be related to reliability, validity, or with research in general. आप टाइप भी कर सकते हो अपना रिस्पॉन्स. I can see Prashant Prashant Wagh sir का एक question है. We will take this in towards the end. Does it mean field data could be reliable but we cannot validate it? Sir, there are tools, there are tests with which we can validate our field data also. We will speak about it in a bit. Dhananjay ji बोल रहे हैं to be try consistently. Okay. Anybody else? First time when he put one single wood stick is not valid and not reliable. Okay, close enough. Yes. So as we could see in the video that the poor chap was left behind by his fellow and that he had a problem that he wanted to move from point A to point B, but there was the gap, and that is perhaps what we do in our research also. We try to bridge the gap. We try to find out the solution to the problems. We propose new approaches or try to prove whether previous theories or if the theories are pragmatic or applicable under different situations. So that was the research problem here, bridging the gap to move from point A to point B. And that is why he had to do something with C, which was the instrument in this scenario. Now he found the means to cross the bridge. So he had the solution, he tried the solution, but the solution was not reliable one. So he had to go back, do some more research to find a new solution and test if that was reliable or not. So we could see that before actually traveling through the instrument that he had built now to cross the bridge, he tested it with his one leg so as to know if it was reliable or not. So similarly in our research, we ought to provide
Excuse
the
me, sir.
solution or yes.
So how is this reliable that you're talking about? Because just previously you were saying that reliability is essentially replicable, whether something is replicable and
Yes, sir. Let me
produces,
come to that
how is
point.
this reliable and that
Yes.
reliable the same?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Let
thank
me
you.
come to that point. Reliability in this scenario. So if the instrument that he had built, if he uses it again, will he still be able to cross the bridge again? If the answer is yes, then the instrument is reliable, sir.
Yes, he could get us another stick of exactly the same weakness and just replicate the experiment over and over again, every time bringing a stick which breaks.
Yes, definitely he could do
Which
that.
means that in the reliable sense, it is still reliable. It is still giving you exactly the same result. It's just that it doesn't solve your problem.
It doesn't solve my problem. Yes, sir. Okay. For example, if there's a cup,
But
for
what
example,
I'm saying is, in the spirit of when you equated reliability to replicability, then this actually would be reliable in that sense. Using a weaker stick and every time having it break is still reliable.
yes, but is it valid? Is it going to solve our problem? No.
Validity comes from measurement, you said. So we are not taking any measurement here. So the question of validity won't even arise.
So measurement as in not measuring the size, it is also about the measurement of the concept. If you allow us to move ahead, you will realize what exactly is the difference between reliability and validity.
Sure, sure. I mean,
Yes?
I was just trying to, get it consistent with what I was thinking. So thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay. Now, moving on, let us delve into what actually is reliability in the context of research instruments. Yeah. So when a measurement is consistent, it is reliable. But of course, reliability does not mean your outcome will be the same. It just means that it will be in the same range. For example, if you scored 95% on a test the first time and the next time you score 96%, but still your results are reliable. So even if there is a minor difference in the outcome, as long as it is within the error margin, your results are reliable. So reliability allows you to assess the degree of consistency in your result. So if you're getting similar results, reliability provides an answer to the question of how similar your results are. And if we speak more formally, then reliability refers to the extent to which the same answers can be obtained using the same instruments more than one time. In simple terms, if your research is associated with high levels of reliability, then other researchers need to be able to generate the same results using the same research methods under similar conditions. Okay. Now we must understand that the reliability problems crop up in many forms. Okay. And reliability is concerned every time a single observer is the source of data, because we have no certain guard against the impact of that observer's subjectivity. Okay, so reliability issues are most of the time closely associated with subjectivity, and once a researcher adopts a subjective approach towards the study, then the level of reliability of the work is going to be compromised. Similarly, if we talk about defining validity in a more formal sense, so measurement or test is valid when it correlates with the expected results and it examines the accuracy of your result. And here is where things get a bit tricky. Now, to establish the validity of a test, the results must be consistent. Now, looking at most experiments, and especially physical measurements, the standard value that establishes the accuracy of a measurement is the outcome of repeating the test to obtain a consistent result. Okay. For example, before I can conclude that all 12-inch rulers are 1 foot, I must repeat the experiment several times and obtain very similar results, indicating that indeed 12-inch rulers are 1 foot. Okay, so validity of research can be explained as an extent at which requirements of scientific research methods have been followed during the process of generating research findings. Okay, so validity is compulsory requirement for all types of studies, and most scientific experiments are inextricably linked in terms of validity and reliability. For example, let's say if you're measuring distance or depth, so valid answers are likely to be reliable also. But the problem crops up in social experiences or social sciences, where one is not the indication of the other. For example, let's say most people believe that people who wear glasses are smart. Okay, so of course I will find example of people जो जो glasses पहनते हैं और जिनका high IQ भी है. Okay, so reliability establish हो जाएगी. But the truth is that most people who wear glasses simply need their vision to be better. That is the validity part. So reliable answers are not always correct, but valid answers are always reliable. Okay, I hope this answers your question, sir. Okay, now moving on, how do we assess reliability and how do we assess validity? So let's take this one by one. So now when assessing reliability, we want to know if the measurement can be replicated. And of course, we will have to change some variables to ensure that this test holds. And most important of which are time, items, and observers. Okay, and accordingly, हमारे 3 टाइप्स की कंसिस्टेंसी होती है ओवर टाइम, जिसको हम टेस्ट रीटेस्ट रिलायबिलिटी बोलते हैं, अक्रॉस आइटम्स जिसको हम इंटरनल कंसिस्टेंसी बोलते हैं, एंड अक्रॉस डिफरेंट रिसर्चर्स जिसको हम इंटर रेटर रिलायबिलिटी बोलते हैं. सो अगर जो मेन फैक्टर है जो हम चेंज कर रहे हैं जब हम रिलायबिलिटी टेस्ट परफॉर्म कर रहे हैं वो टाइम है, so we are performing a test retest reliability assessment. And if we're changing items, then we're performing an internal consistency assessment. It means we are measuring multiple items with a single instrument. And finally, if you're measuring the same item with the same instrument but using different observer, okay, then we are performing an inter-rater reliability test. Let's take these up one by one. Now, test retest reliability refers to the consistency of outcomes over time. Okay, so testing reliability over time does not imply changing the amount of time it takes to conduct an experiment. Rather, it means that we are repeating the experiment multiple times in a short time. Okay, अब कोई short time क्या होगा वो depend करेगा context पर. For example, अगर if I measure the length of my hair today, okay, and tomorrow, I will most likely get the same result every time. Okay. So a short period is a relative in terms of reliability. 2 days for measuring hair length is considered short. But यही 2 दिन का time period would be considered too long अगर हम ये देखना चाह रहे हैं कितना quickly water dries on the sand. Okay. So it is subjective, it is relative. Okay. Now, how do we measure this? So we have a test-retest correlation, which is used to compare the consistency of our results. And this is typically kind of a scatter plot that that shows how similar our values are between the two experiments. And if our answers are reliable, our scatter plot will most likely have a lot of overlapping points. और नहीं है तो हमारे जो scatter plots पे जो points होंगे वो spread out होंगे. ठीक है? I have included a, yeah, जैसे यहाँ पर आप देख रहे हो कि overlapping है थोड़े थोड़े points की. We're also having kind of a linear line here. So yeah, when researchers measure a construct that they assume to be consistent across time, then the scores that they obtain should also be consistent across time. अब ये नहीं बोल रहे हैं हम बिल्कुल same score आना चाहिए, but correlation बहुत high होना चाहिए. Test retest reliability is the extent to which this is actually the case. For example, intelligence. Intelligence is generally thought to be consistent across time. A person who is highly intelligent today will be highly intelligent next week also. So इसका मतलब क्या है कि कोई भी जो भी good measure होगा intelligence का, कोई भी instrument होगा जो intelligence measure कर रहा होगा, so it should produce roughly the same scores for this particular individual next week also जितना आज इसका score आएगा उस test पर. Okay, so clearly a measure that produces highly inconsistent scores over time cannot be a very good measure of construct that is supposed to be consistent. Okay, so assessing test retest reliability requires using the measure on a group of people at one time and then using it again on the same group of people at a later time and then looking at the test retest correlation between the two sets of scores. है ना? अब ये correlation कैसे calculate करना है? Pearson R correlation होता है, ठीक है? So usually the rule of thumb is that जैसे आप फिगर में भी देख पा रहे हो स्क्रीन पर, it shows the correlation between two sets of scores of several university students. एक रोजनबर्ग का सेल्फ एस्टीम स्केल होता है, so that was administered 2 times एक एक हफ्ते के गैप पर. एंड पियर्सन्स का जो हमारा R कोफिशिएंट था कोरिलेशन का इस डेटा के लिए was positive 0.95 और जनरली टेस्ट रीटेस्ट कोरिलेशन ऑफ 0.80 positive or greater is considered to indicate good reliability. Okay, again, high test retest correlation makes sense when the construct being measured is assumed to be consistent over time. Okay, जैसे intelligence वो uniform रहेगी across same time. Big 5 personality dimensions हो गए, लेकिन कुछ constructs होते हैं जो stable नहीं रहते हैं, which are not assumed to be stable over time. For example, mood. Okay, the very nature of mood, for example, is that it changes. So जो measure होगा mood का that produce a low test retest correlation over period of month would not be the cause for concern. So by default अगर जो construct है जो variable है जिसको हम measure कर रहे हैं उसका nature ही ऐसा है that it is supposed to vary across time, then obviously we are going to get a lesser score for test retest reliability coefficient. Okay, moving on to internal consistency. So internal consistency, it is also known as internal reliability. And those of you who must be involved with social sciences research, an important measure that we've been using for ages is Cronbach alpha. So Cronbach alpha basically internal consistency measure karta hai. We'll talk about this in a bit. Okay, what is internal reliability? Internal reliability refers to the consistency of results for various items when measured on the same scale. And this is particularly important again for social sciences research such as surveys because it helps determine the consistency of individuals' responses when asked the same questions. Okay, for example, ज्यादातर जो introvert लोग होंगे, they will say that they enjoy spending time alone and having few friends. However, if there are some introverts who claim that either they do not want to spend time alone or they prefer to be surrounded by many friends, so there is something that doesn't add up. Okay, so these people who claim to be introvert, or one, this factor isn't a reliable way of measuring introversion. Okay, so in general, all the items on such measures are supposed to reflect the same underlying construct. So individuals' score on those items should be correlated with each other. अगर हम रोजनबर्ग की सेल्फ एस्टीम स्केल की बात करें, so people who agree that they are a person of worth should tend to agree that they have a number of good qualities. Okay, and if individuals' responses to the different items are not correlated with each other, then it would no longer make sense to claim that they all are measuring the same underlying construct. And this is true for behavioral and physiological measures as for self-reported measures. For example, people might make a series of bets in a simulated game of roulette as a measure of their level of risk seeking. Now, this measure would be internally consistent to the extent that individual participants bet were consistently high or low across the trials. अब यहाँ पर भी हम लोग स्कैटर प्लॉट, जैसे आप एग्जांपल देख पा रहे हो, ये जो रोजनबर्ग स्केल है, इट्स अ 4-point स्केल एंड देयर वर 10 आइटम्स. ओके, जिसका हमने पिछले टेस्ट रीटेस्ट रिलायबिलिटी में भी स्कैटर प्लॉट देखा था. ओके, so similarly for like test retest reliability, similarly for internal consistency, it can only be measured or assessed by collecting and analyzing the data. Okay, so one approach is to look at split half correlation. अब जैसे नाम से पता चल रहा है, split half correlation. This involves splitting the items into two sets. जैसे first 5, second 5, first half, second half, या फिर इवन नंबर ऑफ क्वेश्चंस को एक ग्रुप में कर लिया, ऑड नंबर ऑफ क्वेश्चंस को एक ग्रुप में कर लिया. आई थिंक समबडी इज
त्याला ऍक्च्युअली गरजच नाही, पण त्याला आगाऊपणा करायचे धंदे. दुसरं काही नाही.
ओके, सो हम ऐसे दो हाफ्स में डिवाइड कर लेते हैं स्प्लिट हाफ कोरिलेशन निकालने के लिए.
असं नाही दिसत नाही, असं नाही करून मग आपण थोडंसं म्हटलं ते दिलंच नाही सर.
सुनील उर्गुलकर सर,
तुला दिलं नाही म्हणा, असं म्हणायचं ना, त्याचा त्याला वापर द्यायचा ना, कव्हरिंग लेटर थोडी बदल होणार आहे.
सुनील जी, can you please mute yourself? सुनील जी, सुनील सर,
मी पाठवतो आपल्या जेव्हा लोकच नाही.
can I request the organizers to mute सुनील जी?
रिलेशन आणि संबंधावर महत्व आहे. काय पाहिलं तर त्या यानं करून दिलं सगळं, काही करावं नाही लागलं मला. नाही नाही नाही, बनगीवर नाही, ढुमणेनं करून दिलं पूर्ण. बनगीर काही गोष्टी हो काही ते त्याला समजते म्हणून यायला म्हटलं. आमचं
No,
वेगळं.
I cannot continue like this.
त्याच्या पद्धतीनं करून
And one of
टाकतो.
the organizers, please intervene.
काय किती वेळा सांगितलं त्यांना, विषयच नाही काढला माझ्या. आपलं थोडे फरक राहते. ते असिस्टंट प्रोफेसर लिहिते,
सुनील जी आप म्यूट कर सकते हैं अपने आप.
आपल्याला नाही लिहिता येते
हेलो,
पहिल्या टाइम मध्ये.
I think he's not
शेवटी
listening
आपलं पत्र
also.
निघते तसंच, पण ते ग्रंथपाला शब्द वापरले जाते.
सर यू कंटिन्यू.
नहीं, समझ में ही नहीं आएगा ऐसे तो. प्रीति मैम, आप हैं यहाँ पर? प्रीति मैम? Okay, now I think it's sorted. Yeah, sorry for the interruptions. Okay, so like test retest reliability, internal consistency को भी हम तभी assess कर सकते हैं जब हमने डेटा कलेक्ट और एनालाइज कर लिया हो. सो एक अप्रोच जिसके बारे में हम बात कर रहे थे, स्प्लिट हाफ कोरिलेशन. अब स्प्लिट हाफ जैसे नाम से ही पता चल रहा है हमें, हम अपने आइटम्स को जिनसे हम मेजर कर रहे हैं उनको दो हाफ में डिवाइड कर लेंगे. जैसे अगर रोजनबर्ग स्केल में 10 आइटम्स थे, तो हमने पहले 5 को एक ग्रुप में रखा और दूसरे 5 को एक ग्रुप में रखा, या फिर ऑड नंबर्स को एक ग्रुप में, इवन नंबर को एक ग्रुप में. या सो उसके बाद हम स्कोर कंप्यूट करते हैं फॉर ईच सेट ऑफ आइटम्स, और फिर उस स्कोर के बीच का हम रिलेशनशिप मेजर करते हैं, एग्जामिन करते हैं. ठीक है, फॉर एग्जांपल अभी जो सामने आपके फिगर है स्क्रीन पर, इट शोज द स्प्लिट हाफ कोरिलेशन बिटवीन सेवरल यूनिवर्सिटी स्टूडेंट्स स्कोर ऑन द इवन नंबर आइटम्स एंड their scores on the odd number items of the Rosenberg self esteem scale. Again, पियर्सन का R कोफिशिएंट हमने निकाला कोरिलेशन का, that was 0.88. Again, the thumb rule is anything greater than positive 0.80 is considered a good internal consistency. So split half correlation simply means dividing the factors used to measure the underlying construct into two parts, plotting them against each other in the form of a scatter plot. Okay. There's another
Sir,
measure for
sir, should I ask one question?
Hanji.
Sir, you just mentioned about internal consistency. So as a researcher, how do we go ahead with this? Means, what are the steps? Could you explain that?
हाँ जी सर, वही बताया ना, आप क्या करोगे इंटरनल कंसिस्टेंसीज के लिए। मान लीजिए आपके एक कॉन्स्ट्रक्ट है, हाँ, उसमें मान लीजिए जैसे हमने स्क्रीन पर दिखाया 10 स्टेटमेंट्स थे, ठीक है। तो हमने क्या किया, पहले 5 को, एक तरीका है स्प्लिट हाफ कोरिलेशन निकालने का, ठीक है। आप फर्स्ट 5 आइटम्स को एक ग्रुप में रखोगे, नेक्स्ट 5 आइटम्स को एक ग्रुप में रखोगे। फॉर एग्जांपल आपने 300 रिस्पोंडेंट्स का डेटा इकट्ठा किया, ठीक है। तो आप इन सारे 300 रिस्पोंडेंट्स के पहले 5 स्टेटमेंट के डेटा को प्लॉट करोगे और दूसरे को प्लॉट करोगे स्कैटर प्लॉट पे, ठीक है। या फिर आप सिंपली कोरिलेशन निकाल सकते हो दोनों स्कैटर्स का, ठीक है, दोनों स्कोर्स का। और अगर वो जो कोरिलेशन कोफिशिएंट आएगा वो 0.80 से ज्यादा आएगा, तो मतलब आपकी इंटरनल कंसिस्टेंसी है। अब ये आपको मैनुअली नहीं करना पड़ता सर, धनंजय सर, there are software,
Sir,
SPS.
I doubt about this because the set of question in the first set and second set are totally different. So plotting
Yes,
a
that is what
correlation,
we
that
want to
doesn't make
measure,
any
sir.
sense.
No, that doesn't make sense. In what sense, sir? You're not getting the point here. ये 10 के 10 स्टेटमेंट सेल्फ एस्टीम को मेजर कर रहे हैं, राइट? वन अंडरलाइंग कंस्ट्रक्ट. So they should, if they are measuring, if they are intending to measure one single construct, then they should move in one single direction. Okay,
Okay, I
that
got
is
it.
what we are trying to.
Sir, in my
Yeah, we are trying to
because in our
establish the
survey.
internal consist. Sir, please hear me out once.
Okay.
Yes. So we are trying to measure the internal consistency of the instrument that is measuring self-esteem. Okay, sir?
Got it, sir. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And now you don't have to do this manually. ये manually नहीं करना है आपको split half. आप SPSS चलाइए, आप SPSS में अपना वेरिएबल का डेटा इंपोर्ट करिए, एंड वो आपको ऑटोमेटिकली एक क्लिक पर आपको गटमैन का स्प्लिट हाफ कोफिशिएंट दे देगा, आपको क्रॉनबेक अल्फा दे देगा, है ना। और भी 2-3 मेजर्स होते हैं, ठीक है। अब ऐसे ही सिंपली स्प्लिट हाफ की जैसे ही एक और मेजर होता है जिसको हम कॉमन, which is also the most common measure of internal consistency used by the researchers in psychology, and it is known as Cronbach's alpha, ठीक है। and alpha is the mean of all possible split half correlation for a set of item. हाँ, मान लीजिए वो अगर हम जो पहला वाला देख रहे थे, इन 10 स्टेटमेंट्स को दो हाफ में डिवाइड करने के 252 कॉम्बिनेशंस बनते हैं, परम्यूटेशंस बनते हैं। सो उन सारे 252 परम्यूटेशंस का अगर हम स्प्लिट हाफ कैलकुलेट करें और उन सारे स्प्लिट हाफ का अगर हम एवरेज लें, तो वो हमारा अल्फा होता है। अगेन अल्फा के लिए usually a value which is greater than 0.80 is desirable, but anything which is greater than 0.70 implies that we have good internal consistency. आप यहाँ पर देख रहे होगे, this is from one of my studies जहां पर मैंने बिग 5 पर्सनालिटी ट्रेट्स लिए थे, ओपन एंड कॉन्शियसनेस, एक्सट्रोवर्जन, एग्रीएबलनेस, न्यूरोटिसिज्म। आप देख रहे होगे यहाँ पर क्रॉनबैक अल्फा भी है। दिस इज एन आउटपुट फ्रॉम द एसपीएसएस सॉफ्टवेयर। ये मैंने खुद मैन्युअली नहीं कैलकुलेट किया, ये सारा कैलकुलेशन। डेटा फॉर 700 रिस्पोंडेंट्स वाज कलेक्टेड एंड वी हैड द रिलायबिलिटी स्कोर, ठीक है। कुछ स्टेटमेंट्स में इशू थे, 0.7 से काफी चीजें कम थी। फिर देन वी इंटरवीन्ड and we could improve our internal consistency and everything was greater than 0.70. यहाँ पर देख पा रहे होगे आप, ठीक है। So there are software that do this. Moving on to the next type of reliability, that is inter-rater reliability. अब जैसे नाम से ही पता चल रहा है, यहाँ पर हम रेटर या फिर जो जज होगा या जो ऑब्जर्वर होगा, वो हम दो अलग अलग, तीन अलग अलग रेटर्स का हम पर्सपेक्टिव लेंगे। And this method of measuring reliability helps prevent personal bias. Inter-rater reliability assessment helps judge outcomes from the different perspective of a multiple observer. एक बहुत अच्छा एग्जाम्पल है, अगर आपने मान लीजिए कोई मील ऑर्डर करी और आपको वो बहुत ही डिलिशियस लगी, नाउ यू कुड बी बायस्ड इन योर जजमेंट फॉर सेवरल रीजन। आपका मील का परसेप्शन कैसा है, आपका मूड कैसा है, आपका हंगर क्वेश्चन, कितनी ज्यादा भूख आपको लगी थी। बट इट इज हाईली अनलाइकली कि 6 और लोगों ने वही मील ऑर्डर करी और उनको भी वो स्वादिष्ट लगी, जबकि वो एक्चुअली नहीं थी। वो स्वादिष्ट आपको हो सकता है, क्योंकि अगर कई बार होता है भूख ज्यादा लगी होती है तो हमें खाना फिर भी ठीक लगता है, अच्छा लगता है। पर अगर 6 और लोग हैं, उनको भी स्वादिष्ट लगे, उनको भी डिलिशियस लगे, when it is actually not, that is highly unlikely. Another factor that could lead to bias is expertise. जैसे प्रोफेशनल डांसर्स, now they would perceive dance move differently than non-professional dancers. सो अगर एक पर्सन कोई भी इंडिविजुअल डांस करता है और वो रिकॉर्ड करता है और वो दोनों ग्रुप को भेज देता है, एक प्रोफेशनल डांसर का ग्रुप है और एक अनप्रोफेशनल डांसर्स है, उनको बोला जाता है आप वीडियो को रेट कीजिए। नाउ देयर इज अ हाई लाइक्लीहुड ऑफ अ सिग्निफिकेंट डिफरेंस इन देयर रेटिंग्स, यस, बिकॉज ऑफ देयर एक्सपर्टीज। पर अगर दोनों ही जजेस अग्री करते हैं दैट द पर्सन इज अ ग्रेट डांसर डिस्पाइट देयर ऑपोजिंग व्यू पॉइंट्स, देन द पर्सन इज लाइकली अ ग्रेट डांसर। Okay, so inter-rater reliability is the extent to which different observers are consistent in their judgments. Okay, moving on, how to assess the validity. Now there are different forms of research validity, and the main ones which have been specified by Cohen et al. Are content validity, criterion related validity, construct validity. Then we also have internal, external validity, concurrent validity and face validity. बट मेजरली जो हम डिस्कस करते हैं, जो रिपोर्ट करते हैं और जो बहुत कंसर्निंग होती हैं, देयर आर कंटेंट वैलिडिटी, व्हिच इज द एक्सटेंट टू व्हिच a research instrument accurately measures all aspects of the construct. And then we have construct validity, which specifies the extent to which a research instrument measures the intended construct. And then we have criterion validity, which is the extent to which a research instrument is related to the other instruments that measure the same variable. Okay, we will discuss about these in detail. So evaluating validity can be more tedious than reliability. Reliability measure करना बहुत easy होता है, आपके पास data है, आप software में upload कीजिए and you will get the answer. But with reliability, you're attempting to demonstrate that your results are consistent, whereas with validity, you want to prove the correctness of your outcome. So discussions of validity usually divide into several distinct types. But a good way to interpret these types is that there are other kinds of evidence in addition to reliability that should be taken into account when judging the validity of a measure. Okay, so हम तीन basic kinds के बारे में बात करते हैं: face validity, content validity and criterion validity. Okay, the first category is content validity. Now this category looks at whether the instrument adequately covers all the content that it should with respect to the variables. Agar alag, in other words, we want to answer the question, does the instrument cover the entire domain related to the variable or the construct it was designed to measure? Okay, so content validity measure करता है क्या जो हमारा टेस्ट है वो सारा का सारा कंटेंट जो उसे मेजर करना था वो कवर कर रहा है या नहीं कर रहा है, टू प्रोवाइड द आउटकम दैट यू आर एक्सपेक्टिंग. ओके, मान लीजिए आई वांट टू टेस्ट द हाइपोथेसिस कि जो 90% जनरेशन जी है वो सोशल मीडिया पोल यूज करता है सर्वे के लिए, और जो 90% मिलेनियल है वो गूगल फॉर्म्स यूज करता है. ठीक है, तो उसके लिए हमें सैंपल साइज चाहिए होगा दैट वुड अकाउंट फॉर हाउ जेन जी एंड हाउ मिलेनियल्स गैदर इंफॉर्मेशन. Okay, so content validity is the extent to which a measure covers the construct of interest. For example, अगर researcher conceptually define कर रहा है test anxiety को as involving both sympathetic nervous system activation which leads to nervous feelings, also including negative thoughts, तो फिर जो उसका measure of test anxiety है उसमें आइटम्स होने चाहिए जो दोनों को कवर करें, नर्वस फीलिंग को भी और नेगेटिव थॉट्स को भी. या फिर or consider that attitudes are usually defined as involving thoughts, feelings and action towards something. So by this conceptual definition, a person has a positive attitude towards exercises to that extent that he or she thinks positive thoughts about exercising, feels good about exercising, and he actually exercises. Okay, so to have good content validity, a measure of individual's attitude toward exercise will have to reflect all three of these aspects. Usually, कर सकते हम by carefully checking the measurement against the conceptual definition of the construct. And content validity refers to determining validity by evaluating what is being measured. Okay, क्या जो measure किया जाना था वो measure हो पा रहा है या नहीं, वो सब कुछ measure हो पा रहा है या नहीं. Content validity test if your research is measuring everything to produce an accurate result. एक एग्जाम्पल और कंसिडर करते हैं. मान लीजिए हम ये जानना चाहते हैं, हमारा रिसर्च ये जानना चाहता है कि जो हेयर लॉस हो रहा है विमेन में वो उससे क्या है. ओके, नाउ फॉर दिस वी विल हैव टू कंसिडर थिंग्स लाइक पोस्टपार्टम हेयर लॉस, एलोपेशिया, नहीं किया, then we will be risking significantly reducing the validity of our research because we will not be covering this. मान लीजिए इस एग्जांपल में कोई there is a certain woman who is losing her hair. Sorry. For example, इसी एग्जांपल में there is a certain woman who is losing her hair due to postpartum hair loss, excessive manipulation and dryness. हमने अपनी स्टडी में सिर्फ पोस्टपार्टम हेयर लॉस लिखा, तो मेरा रिसर्च ये तो दिखाएगा दैट शी हैज हेयर लॉस, but it will also show that she has postpartum hair loss, which is not accurate. So my conclusion is correct, but it does not fully account for the reason why this woman is losing her hair. Okay, so that is what content validity is about. Another subset of content validity is face validity. Okay, अब जिस नाम से पता चल रहा है, फेस वैलिडिटी इज अ काइंड ऑफ क्वांटिटेटिव मेजर, जहां पर हमारे पास कुछ क्वांटिटेटिव असेसमेंट नहीं होता, जहां पर एक्सपर्ट से हम पूछते हैं उनका ओपिनियन क्या है हमारे इंस्ट्रूमेंट को लेके, वेदर इट इज मेजरिंग द कंसेप्ट इंटेंडेड और नॉट, and it's how we anticipate a test to be. For example, when answering a customer service survey, I would expect to be asked about how I feel about the service provided. Okay, so face validity is the extent to which a measurement method appears, जैसे on its face, to measure the construct of interest. So for example, most people would expect a self-esteem questionnaire to include items about whether they see themselves as a person of worth and whether they think they have good qualities. So questionnaire that included these good face validity. And again, the finger length method of measuring self-esteem on the other hand seems to do with self-esteem. And the face validity can be assessed quantitatively, for example, by having a large sample rate in terms of whether it appears to measure what it intends to, but it is usually assessed informally. जैसे हम अपना क्वेश्चनेयर डेटा कलेक्ट करने से पहले हम एक्सपर्ट्स को दिखा लेते हैं कि आपको क्या, आपका क्या, जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल आई वाज वर्किंग रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट जहां पर मुझे स्टॉक मार्केट के इक्विटी इन्वेस्टर्स का डेटा इकट्ठा करना था टू अंडरस्टैंड कि उनके पर्सनालिटी बिहेवियरल बायसेस पे कुछ इंपैक्ट है उनकी पर्सनालिटी या नहीं. तो फुल फ्लेजेड 700 रिस्पोंडेंट्स का डेटा इकट्ठा करने से पहले मैं इक्विटी इन्वेस्टर्स से, कुछ साइकोलॉजिस्ट से और कुछ रिसर्चर से अपने इंस्ट्रूमेंट की फेस वैलिडिटी के बारे में कमेंट करने को कहा. ओके, सो फेस वैलिडिटी इज एट बेस्ट
Sir, can I ask
a
you a
very
question?
weak kind of evidence. Please,
Excuse me, sir. Can I ask you a question?
हाँ जी.
Yes, you
हाँ जी, हाँ जी.
yeah, you mentioned here that face validity is a subset of content validity. Isn't it?
Yes.
Why would you say that? Because couldn't it be that face validity, or somebody invalidating it on face value, could do it for things other than content coverage?
No, can you please elaborate a bit more? I mean, can do it for other than content?
Meaning some.
See, I will tell you again, sir. I hope this clarifies your doubt. So face validity is सबसेट, बिकॉज कंटेंट वैलिडिटी में भी हम क्या कर रहे हैं, हम बेसिकली यही देख रहे हैं whether our instrument is actually measuring or covering all the contents that it should cover, right?
Exactly.
And face validity is asking the experts, taking their opinion as to whether they anticipate our instrument, our measurement instrument, to cover what it should, what it ought to cover.
Oh,
So
okay.
in that sense, it's a yes.
So face validity is only about content coverage, not some other deficiency in the measurement, other than actually.
No. Yes, it is about whether our instrument is including, it is intending, what it intends to measure is being included in the instrument or not.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so yeah, what I was saying, that face validity is at best a very weak kind of evidence that the measurement method is measuring what it is supposed to be. And one reason is that it is based on people's intuition about human behavior, which are frequently wrong. So it is also the case that many established measures in psychology work quite well despite lacking face validity. फॉर एग्जाम्पल एक पर्सनालिटी, जैसे मैं बता रहा था ना, अभी हम लोग बात कर रहे थे बिग 5 इन्वेंटरी की, जहां पर 5 हमारे पर्सनालिटी के इंपॉर्टेंट ट्रेट्स होते हैं: ओपननेस, एक्सट्रोवर्जन, कॉन्शियसनेस, न्यूरोटिसिज्म, एंड आई थिंक ओसियान, अग्रीएबलनेस इज द फिफ्थ वन. ऐसी एक और पर्सनालिटी का इन्वेंटरी होता है, आप सब लोग ऑनलाइन जाकर चेक भी कर सकते हो, जिसको मिनेसोटा MMPI2 बोलते हैं, मिनेसोटा मल्टीफेजिक पर्सनालिटी इन्वेंटरी. That measures many personality characteristics and disorders by having people decide whether each of over 567 different statements apply to them or not. Okay, and where many of the statements do not have any obvious relationship to the construct that they measure. जैसे उस इन्वेंटरी में, पर्सनालिटी क्वेश्चनर में, देयर आर क्वेश्चंस लाइक आई एंजॉय डिटेक्टिव और मिस्ट्री स्टोरीज. देयर इज अनदर क्वेश्चन दैट सेज द साइट ऑफ ब्लड डज नॉट फ्राइटन मी और मेक मी सिक. Okay, so both measure the suppression of aggression. In this case, it is not the participants' literal answer to these questions that are of interest, but rather whether the pattern of the participants' responses to a series of questions matches those of individuals who tend to suppress their aggression. Okay, there are 567 statements in MMPI2. Okay, so quantifying face validity might be a bit difficult because you are measuring the perception validity, not the validity itself. So face validity is concerned with whether the method used for measurement will produce accurate results rather than the measurement itself. Okay, so if the method used for measurement does not appear to test the accuracy of a measurement, its face validity is low. Okay, for example, there's another example: less than 40% of men over the age of 20 in, say, Delhi are at least 5 feet 10 inches tall. The most logical approach would be to collect height data from men over the age of 20 in Delhi. Okay, लेकिन इसी केस में asking men over the age of 20 what is their favorite meal to determine their height, that is something which is pretty bizarre. So method I'm using to assess the validity of my research is quite questionable because it lacks correlation to what I want to measure. Okay, now moving to a more concrete measurement of measure of validity, which is criterion validity. So criterion validity is when you compare your results to what you are supposed to get based on a chosen criteria. Okay, it is the extent to which individual scores on a measure are correlated with other variables which are known as criteria that one would expect them to be correlated with. Okay, for example, एक इंस्ट्रूमेंट है, हमने नया इंस्ट्रूमेंट बनाया जो कि टेस्ट एंजाइटी को मेजर करता है. टेस्ट एंजाइटी मतलब एग्जाम एंजाइटी. ओके, अब आइडियली एग्जाम एंजाइटी या टेस्ट एंजाइटी शुड बी नेगेटिवली कोरिलेटेड विद द परफॉर्मेंस on an important school exam, college exam में, है ना? But if it were to found that people's score, students' score were in fact negatively correlated with their exam performance, मतलब जिसका टेस्ट एंजाइटी स्कोर हाई था उसका स्कोर, एग्जाम स्कोर लो आना चाहिए था, तो मतलब ठीक एविडेंस है ये दैट हमारा जो टेस्ट है वो एक्चुअली में, हमारा जो मेजरमेंट है वो एक्चुअली में लोगों की टेस्ट एंजाइटी मेजर कर रहा है. पर अगर मान लीजिए if it were to be found that students scored equally well on the exam regardless of their test anxiety score, तो इसका मतलब है कि हमारा जो मेजर है उसकी वैलिडिटी पे क्वेश्चन मार्क है, डाउट है. ओके, Now, criteria can be anything. A criterion can be any variable that one has reason to think should be correlated with the construct being measured. And there will usually be many of them. For example, test anxiety score में negative correlation आ रहा है अगर exam performance से और course grade से, and positive correlation आ रहा है general anxiety से, blood pressure during an exam. Okay, so these all become criteria. Or imagine that a researcher develops a new measure of physical risk taking. Now, individuals' scores on this measure should be correlated with the participation in extreme activities such as rock climbing, snowboarding, number of speeding tickets they have received, even the number of broken bones they have had over the years. So all these become criteria in that sense. So when the criterion is measured at the same time as the construct, उसको हम बोलते हैं concurrent validity. लेकिन when the criterion is measured at some point in the future, after the construct has been measured, then it is referred to as predictive validity. जैसे टेस्ट एंजाइटी का स्कोर हमने आज क्वेश्चनर सब बच्चों को बोला आप फिल कीजिए, और हमने सबके टेस्ट एंजाइटी स्कोर्स कैलकुलेट किए. एक हफ्ते बाद, 2 हफ्ते बाद, 1 महीने बाद उनका एक्चुअल एग्जाम हुआ, फिर उसकी परफॉर्मेंस को हमने क्राइटेरिया कंसीडर किया और फिर कोरिलेशन या फिर रिलेशनशिप एस्टैब्लिश करने की कोशिश की. सो दैट विल बिकम अ प्रेडिक्टिव वैलिडिटी. जब जो क्राइटेरिया हम चूज कर रहे हैं वो फ्यूचर में मेजर होगा, दैट बिकम्स प्रेडिक्टिव वैलिडिटी. पर दोनों चीजें अगर साइमल्टेनियसली मेजर हो रही है तो उसको हम कॉन्करेंट वैलिडिटी बोलते हैं. Okay, so predictive validity helps predict future outcomes based on the data that we have. For example, if a larger number of students performed exceptionally well in a test, so you can use this to predict that they understood the concept on which the test was based and they will perform well in their exams. On the other hand, concurrent validity involves testing with different variables at the same time. For example, let's say setting up a literature test for your students on 2 different books and assessing them at the same time. So you're measuring your students' literature proficiency with these 2 books. And if your students truly understood the subject, they should be able to correctly answer questions about both the books. Okay. Moving on to the next type, which is convergent and discriminant validity. So now criteria can also include other measures of the same construct. For example, we would expect new measure of test anxiety or physical risk taking to be positively correlated with existing measures of the same construct. Okay, this is known as convergent validity. जैसे हम personality को measure कर रहे हैं और हम अपना नया कोई instrument बनाए, नया questionnaire बनाए, so जो हमारे results आएंगे same respondent का, दूसरे जो क्वेश्चनर थे, दूसरे जो इन्वेंटरी थी, उसका जो रिजल्ट होगा वो भी सेम आना चाहिए और एटलीस्ट पॉजिटिव कोरिलेशन होना चाहिए. सो दैट इज नोन एज कन्वर्जेंट वैलिडिटी. Discriminant validity, on the other hand, is the extent to which scores on a Okay. Discriminant validity, on the other hand, is the extent to which scores on a measure are not correlated with measures of variables that are conceptually distinct. ठीक है, मान लीजिए हम सेल्फ एस्टीम मेजर कर रहे हैं. ठीक है, अब सेल्फ एस्टीम क्या होता है? इज अ जनरल एटीट्यूड टुवर्ड्स द सेल्फ, और सेल्फ एस्टीम remains fairly stable over time. Okay, and it is not same as the mood, which is how good or bad one happens to be feeling right now. So अगर हमारा instrument is meant to measure, new instrument is meant to measure self-esteem, so it should not be very highly correlated with their moods. अगर हमारा जो new measure है self-esteem का अगर highly correlated है with the measure of mood, then it could be argued that the new measure is not really measuring self-esteem, it is measuring mood instead. Okay, and when they created the need for cognition scale, there were 2 researchers, Casiopo and Petty. They also provided evidence of discriminant validity by showing that respondent score were not correlated with certain other variables. Okay, for example, they found only a weak correlation between people's need for cognition and a measure of their cognitive style, the extent to which they tend to think analytically, by breaking ideas into smaller parts, or holistically in terms of the bigger picture. Okay, so in nutshell, it examines the validity of your research by determining what not to base it on. That is what discriminant validity is. So you're removing elements that are not a strong factor to help validate your research. Okay, Another example could be that being a vegan does not imply that you're allergic to meat. Okay. Now, after we have discussed different types of reliability and validity, the question arises, how as researchers do we go about that? How do we ensure that validity, our research is reliable and valid? So we need to have a kind of a bulletproof research design to ensure that our research is both valid and reliable. And this means that our methods, our sampling design, and even we as researchers should not be biased. Okay. To ensure the reliability of your research, you need to apply your measurement methods consistently. And the chances of reproducing the same results for a test are higher when you maintain the method you're using to experiment. For example, if you want to determine the reliability of the weight of a bag of chips using a scale, then you have to consistently use this scale to measure the bag of chips each time you experiment. And you must also keep the conditions of your research consistent. For example, if you are experimenting to see how quickly water dries on sand, then you need to consider all of the weather elements that day. So if you experimented on a sunny day, the next experiment should also be conducted on a sunny day to obtain the reliable result. And if we talk about ensuring validity, then there are several ways to determine the validity of your research. And majority of them require the use of highly specific and high quality measurement methods. Before you begin your test, choose the best method for producing the desired results. And this method should be pre-existing and proven. And also your sample should be very specific. If you're collecting data on how dogs respond to fear, then your results are more likely to be valid if you base them on a specific breed of dogs rather dogs in general. Okay. So measures to ensure validity of a research includes, but again, they are not limited to, the list is not exhaustive at all. We should have appropriate time for the study. Okay, appropriate methodology has to be chosen, taking into account the characteristics of the study. Most suitable sampling method for the study has to be selected. The respondents must not be pressured in any way to select specific choices among the answer sets. And it is important to understand that although threats to research reliability and validity can never be totally eliminated, however, researchers need to strive to minimize this threat as much as possible. And more specifically, we can go for these specific remedies to deal with different types of validity issues depending upon the context. For example, for content validity, we can have expert review, which involves subject matter experts to review the data collection instrument and ensure all relevant contents are covered. We can again conduct an extensive literature review to identify key dimensions of the construct and ensure they are included in the study. And again, literature is where you should be spending 80% of your time. Okay, because everything has an answer in the literature. Be it identifying the research gap, be it identifying what variables you're going to use, what construct you are going to use, what measurement scale you're going to use, what technique methodology you are going to use. Every question has an answer in the literature review. Even when you justify your results, you try to pacify your results, the solution, the grounded theory, the theoretical background, everything lies in the literature review. Okay. Another technique could be pre-testing or pilot studies. For example, you can conduct pilot studies or pre-test with a small sample to refine instrument and ensure comprehensive content coverage. Again, I will give you an example. So see, we all are individual retail researchers, right? Individual researchers. So we do not have at our disposal huge resources and in terms of the number of personals that we can employ, even in terms of the time that we can take. Okay, so we do research on an individual basis until unless it's for a project. Yeah, so we have certain constraints with respect to time and the costs that are associated with research. So rather than going full-fledged collecting data from 1,700 500 respondents and then realizing later on that there was some error in my questionnaire, it is better, it is advisable to first do a face validity, take an expert opinion, and then also conduct a pilot study for a smaller sample, say 50. You calculate the reliability statistics, you calculate the Cronbach alpha, you calculate the Splitman half, coefficient, split half coefficient of Guttman, and then you see and take feedback from the respondents as to what might be confusing for them. Okay, and then you revise your questionnaire, revise your measurement scale, and then you go for full-fledged data collection. Okay, so that is what is known as pilot study. For construct validity, one of the approaches that you can use is triangulation. So you can use multiple data collection methods to cross-verify the findings and ensure that they align with the theoretical construct. You can then also, switch to theoretical framework. You base the study on a well-established theoretical framework that clearly defines the construct and their interrelationships. You can also then do member checking, basically involving participants in reviewing the findings to confirm that they accurately represent their experiences in the constructs being studied. Okay, so once you have collected the data, you analyze the data, you have the findings, then you discuss the findings with a few participants, few respondents, and ask them to review the findings to confirm that they actually represent their experiences. Okay. For criterion validity, again, for concurrent validity, we can compare the study's finding with other established and valid measures to see if they align. For example, we are studying stress, we can compare our findings with validated stress scales. For predictive validity, we can use the findings to make prediction about future outcomes and then verify these prediction against the actual outcomes. For correlation analysis, we can assess the correlation between the studies measured and other relevant criteria to ensure that they align as expected. And for discriminant validity, we can have divergent validation, which ensures that the construct measured do not correlate too highly with different construct. They should theoretically not be related to. जैसे हम अभी self esteem और mood की बात कर रहे थे, अब self esteem और mood का high correlation नहीं आना चाहिए. आ रहा है तो या तो हमारा mood का instrument distorted है या फिर हमारा self esteem का. Comparison with similar construct is another strategy that we can do for discriminant validity. We can compare the study's constructs with similar but distinct construct to ensure that they are not excessively overlapping. And then again, we can also go for factor analysis. We can use factor analysis to confirm that items intended to measure different constructs load on separate factors. Most of you must have heard about confirmatory factor analysis and exploratory factor analysis. So we can perform an EFA to have our own factorization. Then we can collect more data and then we do a confirmatory factor analysis. All these are part of structure equation modeling, SEM. Okay, then conversion validity, we again can go for triangulation, we can go for correlation analysis, we can also have literature comparison. We compare the study's finding with results from previous studies that measure the same construct to ensure alignment. For face validity, as we've already discussed, we can ask experts to evaluate if the instrument appears to measure what it is supposed to measure. We can ask for participants' feedback. We can seek feedback from a small group of participants to ensure that they understand the questions and they find them relevant to the construct being studied. We can then also go for pilot testing to see if the instrument appears to measure the intended construct and make adjustment based on feedback. Okay, these are some of the references that were used in delivering and preparing for this session. I will be sharing these presentations with the organizers, so they may share it with you all on your participants group. Now, one question that might pop up is that how do we measure all these reliability and validity? And software that can maybe show you an output file from one of the projects that I was working on. Yeah, just give me a moment. Yeah, let me reshare the screen. Okay, so you can see these are the results. So these were the hypotheses I was working on a RDC project, okay, and these are the factor loadings, okay, and you can see there are software. For example, this was done on PLS-SEM. So these were my three very important variables: financial awareness, financial behavior, and financial knowledge. And you can see the Cronbach alpha value for one of the variable was lower than 0.70, and that is why it's been highlighted. And again, the software does it, okay. And then these are HTMT ratio and Fortner-Larkin ratio. This establishes the discriminant validity. These are two measures of discriminant validity that we use. Okay. So this was initial model, and then we also had a revised model with more variables. This is what it looks like with statements. Okay. So we were basically measuring what is the impact of overconfidence on finance, on the relationship between financial awareness and financial behavior. How does it work? Similarly, we took another behavioral biases. So these are the results of the model. So yeah, that would be all. Thank you, and have a. I can take a few questions. We still have 10 minutes, 5 minutes left. Ranchana Gazbai has asked me a question. Please give some software name for data analysis. Now, ma'am, it depends upon what is our objective. For example, the trend for the day is that you start training yourself on R, which is an open software. Now it does all kind of analysis, be it based on qualitative data, quantitative data, word cloud बनाना है आपको, या आपको प्राइमरी डेटा पे काम करना है, सेकेंडरी डेटा पे काम करना है. पर यूजुअली जो प्राइमरी डेटा पे काम करते हैं, जो क्वेश्चनर के थ्रू डेटा हम इकट्ठा करते हैं, फील्ड डेटा जो इकट्ठा करते हैं, अगर हमारा स्ट्रक्चर्ड क्वेश्चनर है तो हम लोग SPSS अमॉस यूज करते हैं या PLS-SEM यूज करते हैं. दीज आर द टू सॉफ्टवेयर. बट अगर आपका डेटा जो है वो क्वालिटेटिव नेचर का है ना, फॉर एग्जांपल ओपन एंडेड इंटरव्यूज लिए आपने, आप उसको एनालाइज करना चाहते हो, आप फोकस ग्रुप डिस्कशंस लिए आपने, आप उनको एनालाइज करना चाहते हो, इंटरव्यूज को, इन डेप्थ इंटरव्यूज को एनालाइज करना चाहते हो, देन देयर आर सॉफ्टवेयर लाइक atlas.ti. Then there's another software, MaxQDA, which can be used. लेकिन अगर आप सेकेंडरी डेटा पे काम करना चाहते हो, ओके, फॉर एग्जांपल डेटा ऑफ मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक वेरिएबल्स, डेटा एग्रीकल्चरल प्रोड्यूस का कितना है, NSSO का डेटा है, देन यू कैन यूज आइदर eViews और you can also use Stata, but Stata पे थोड़ा कमांड लिखना आना चाहिए. So but these are again paid versions, so either you will get pirated versions, or you can also go for eViews ka jaise I know you can apply for a tutor or student version. They will give you 2 years student version access. Then otherwise, if you want to go for free software, you can either use Gretel for secondary data analysis, and R again is a wonderful tool, and you do not need to have a coding background in R. You can use R Studio as the IDE, as an interface. R Studio, that is quite friendly, user friendly. So these are some of the software. You can please type in your queries if you have any questions.
Yes, sir. You can hear me, sir? Hello.
Yes.
Yes. Although I'm not from a field where data is collected for research, I found your talk very informative and interesting. Thank you so much.
I'm glad, sir.
So when it comes to secondary data, suppose you have a secondary data that doesn't meet the threshold of internal consistency, then in that case, would it be considered to be, would you have to discard it for, or is there some remedy that is possible where you can't collect the data again?
Sir, yeah. Sir, if you remember, during the first few slides only, I mentioned that for the question or the concern for reliability and validity usually arises for the data that is collected. The mode of collection is subjective. Okay. For secondary data, since we are relying on IMF and World Bank and all sorts of those organizations because they are collecting, so we're not questioning their collection methods. So we make an assumption that it is valid. Okay. So reliability and validity are not the concerns in case of secondary data. there, there we are looking for the normality of the data, the other characteristics, the stationarity of the data. Those are the different concerns for secondary data.
No, what I was meaning is IMF and all are highly reputed sources. But let us say, you had a local source where you got secondary data, you ran your tests and you found that it is not internally consistent. Say the split half correlation is coming quite low. Would you consider such data for carrying out your research?
No, sir, we should not. Ideally, for all these sorts all these sorts of research which are meant to measure abstract, qualitative, or quantifying certain qualitative variables, the data is collected firsthand only. The only caveat here is that we, being individual researchers, we will limit our sample size at a point. So the generalizability of the studies is to be compromised, because we can say even in a study that is done in Nagpur, the implication of that study might not be valid for another city in the same state. Yeah.
Right. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Yeah, there's one more question, ma'am, from Prashant Wagh. He's from botany background, and sir deals with quantitative data regarding plant growth from the field. Kindly suggest methods and software for enumerating reliability and validity of such data. Ma'am, reliability and validity, since you are collecting, I'm supposing that you would be measuring the leaf size or the width. Okay, so that in that scenario, since you're measuring, so your measurement instruments are already reliable and they're going to produce valid results if it is being carried out without any biasness. So that should not be concerned there. But yeah, for software, I think I know a lot of people from anthropology who works on bones and all. They use SPSS for collecting data, because you would want to kind of try to establish certain relationships between your physiological features and the way you deal with certain problems. Yeah? So if your hypothesis is with respect to those, then you would definitely have certain components of subjective questions, or certain questions in your instruments. Then you would want to establish reliability with respect to those. But anything that is being physically measured, then you do not calculate reliability and validity for that.
Okay, sir. Any more question? Though it is a little bit confusing and difficult topic, but sir has explained it in a very simplified way with number of examples. Sir will meet us on Saturday also on another new topic. So if there are no further questions, we'll wind up our first session here. Sir, रुकेंगे यहाँ पे आशुतोष sir?
Hanji ma'am.
Yes.
I would request to kindly take your leave.
Yes.
I have to
So
rush
I
to another
extend
meeting.
my heartfelt thanks to respected Dr. Ashutosh Yadav sir for wonderful session on reliability and validity in research. Thank you so much, sir, once again from all the participants and my own behalf. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you
See
for the
you on
participants
Saturday,
to be
sir.
so engaging. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you, friends. You please proceed for your lunch break. We will meet at 1:30 for our next session. I'll start the meeting at 1:15. Thank you so much, everyone.